An awful lot to talk about today. Particularly want to hear from you on the phone. See if you get in touch about Natalie Elphicke, who, yeah, good question. She was the MP for Dover, or the Tory MP for Dover. She's still the Tory MP for Dover, but she's now a Labour Party MP. Just yesterday, just before Prime Minister's questions, Keir Starmer announced that she was defecting. She crossed the floor, quite literally, walked in, instead of going to Tory benches, went to Labour benches, much to the surprise of an awful lot of Labour MPs, including, it turns out, even the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who only found out a few minutes beforehand. Big surprise being that she's actually someone very much on the right wing of the Conservative Party, being very critical, not just of the Tories' failure to tackle illegal immigration, massively hitting a constituency like hers, Dover in Kent, right on the front line, but also even more critical of Labour over the issue. She says, though, it's all about tackling migration, but also tackling the housing shortage, and that's where she thinks that Labour have the answers. That said, she is standing down at the next election, so why has she felt the need to cross the floor? Well, many are asking that. What job has she been promised after the next election? There's no doubt a huge backlash for Keir Starmer on this from his own MPs, not least for the things she had to say about her husband, not just before but after he was convicted of 2 sexual assaults on women. Well, I want to hear from you what your reaction is to a defection. What do you feel about defecting MPs generally? Should there be a by-election? Does it really matter? Who is it hurt? Who is it helped? Give us a call. Tell us all your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text on 87222. You can get in touch at TalkTV on X. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Well, let's get the thoughts once again of Benedict Spence on this. We spoke to Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, a Tory MP, who was sort of saying, you know, everyone was rather surprised by this, and you know, but things aren't as bad as they look. A latest poll putting the Tories 30 points behind Labour. Did this damage Rishi Sunak yesterday?
I don't think it massively damaged him, because I'm not sure there's much more damage that can be done. That's the key thing, is that we're all looking at this now through the prism of, is it a good thing for Labour, or is it in fact a bad thing for Labour? Nobody's actually paying attention to whether or not it was a bad thing for the government, which is normally what you'd do. But for Sir Keir Starmer, actually, it is raising, you know, some serious questions, I think, from a lot of his own backbenchers and frontbenchers, it turns out, about what kind of a Labour Party, how broad a church he plans on it being. I can see some logic to it, to be honest. She's not going to be an MP, she doesn't want to be an MP afterwards, but obviously she would quite like a role going forward, be that as an advisor, not unlike Dan Poulter, who is aiming to be an advisor on the NHS.
What they want is a job. What they want is something to pay the mortgage with when they're out of a job.
But these southern sort of coastal constituencies, they are actually quite, you know, hardline, shall we say, on migration, because they're the ones that have to bear the brunt of this. So without having to go through the rigmarole of having her selected as a Labour MP, which would be very difficult, you know, in the circumstances for the local party, and her joining a trade union and all that sort of thing. Actually, if he's able to stand this person up and say, well, look, we've got a, you know, quite a hard line former Conservative who is going to advise us, and, you know, this classic Labour thing that they do of appointing czars, can you actually see maybe her being a migration czar?
I can't, because again, because most of the Labour Party, I mean, again, one of the reasons they're voting Labour is because they don't agree with what they consider to be a hardline Rishi Sunak Tory policy on migration.
Well,
Natalie Elphicke doesn't. I know. I don't think it's hardline. They think it. They think it is. They think Rwanda's. Look, she approves the Rwanda policy. She thinks that Rishi Sunak isn't doing enough on that issue, and yet she's now saying she's going to go to Labour, who she's criticised for doing nothing on it. I mean, I don't see how A, it makes sense for her, and B, why it makes sense for the Labour Party to have someone in who completely disagrees with, as far as I can tell, every single policy.
Well, the first thing I would say is actually I think Sir Keir Starmer would get a lot more credit if he were to say to the rats fleeing the sinking ship, no, I'm not going to accept you, I can win on my own terms, and we can all see what you're doing. However, are you talking about Labour MPs or the average voter? Which, let's be clear, even with a very large swing, Sir Keir Starmer does actually need to win over a lot of people. It has to be a large swing to get that majority, a record swing, in fact, to get a majority, and migration to people who are inclined to vote Labour or Conservative is a huge issue. And I think that's one of the things that people do fear, actually, about the Labour Party, is that they won't be firm enough on migration.
They don't fear, they quite rightly know.
Exactly. So
Labour effectively are in favour of an open border policy.
So what better would you do, to actually trying to persuade people in those constituencies, other than to get right of the Tory party Natalie Elphicke to come and stand on the beaches and say this is what we'll do differently? You may be sceptical, and I'm very cynical about this, but I can see why there is an element of this that makes a little bit of sense. It does cause him problems. I do think that there were better options, but I can see the thinking in his mind, even if it's not what I would have done.
Yeah, I don't see it. I think it's been very damaging, I have to say. Look, I've asked you to get in touch. Let's go to a call on this. We're going to talk about lots of other issues as well. But let's go to Gareth, who is in Derbyshire, who's rung in on 0344 499 1000, as you can at any time. Do get in touch. And Gareth, you want to talk about Natalie Elphicke. What do you want to say?
Yeah, well, it's slightly broader than just Natalie Elphicke, but because it's quite an interesting topic, this is. It's actually about the type of MPs the Conservatives have been selecting, and this has been going on for quite a long time, and it's the way they've been doing it, because I think one of your callers touched on it earlier about the age group, but they seem to have gone away from selecting members who are actually committed to the party and people who've actually had a life before politics.
Got something to offer, some wisdom to offer.
Something to offer. It's not really about whether they're white collar or blue collar, whatever, but, you know, when people are just brought in because they sort of match the Conservatives' idea of which sort of category they might fit against. Yeah, because I know they've been doing it for about 10 to 15 years. I think Cameron started it.
Yeah, they started having a lot more control over who could stand. I mean, I know people who've been completely vetoed on the list. You think like the long-standing sort of Tories who you think a lot of people would be very happy to vote for. But also a lot of it is, well, you've been a special advisor, you've done your time, you've worked in the press office, the Tory Central Office. Now we'll parachute you into a seat. There's been a lot of that going on.
Well, one of the things they do is they ignore councillors who've worked hard and done terms and been voted in their own area.
And have a relationship with local voters. Yeah,
they parachute people in from other areas. I've seen this in our area. But, I mean, with Natalie Elphicke, I don't want to put any despise her particularly, but, I mean, I think her husband, he got into some difficulty.
Charlie Elphicke got convicted of sexual assault against 2 women.
And so then the local party just selected his wife. I mean, wasn't there any local councillors in? Is it Dover area last year?
Yeah.
Who had actually probably done 3 terms on it.
Yeah, it was regarded as something of a stitch-up at the time, and again, inappropriate. Again, I don't like this whole sort of passing it on to your family members. It's all a bit weird and creepy, to be honest with you. But the main thing here for a lot of people is that, I suppose, when you elect someone, when you vote someone, often people don't know the candidate. Some MPs have, a real personal vote. They've been around for years, and they sort of defy the party polls. But largely, people are going, I vote for the Tory candidate, I vote for the Labour candidate, or Reform, or Lib Dem, or Green, or whatever it is. But then, if you then swap to a different party, you're betraying your voters, aren't you?
Well, yeah, you are. I mean, it's clear that she hasn't really got a form as a Conservative, really, because you can't walk over to Labour. I mean, I'm actually a Conservative councillor. Yeah. I couldn't walk over to Labour. I've seen Greens walk to the Conservatives, and I've seen, you do tend to get the odd situation where people become independent, but you can't walk from Conservative to Labour.
No, I don't, and particularly over this crucial issue, the illegal immigration issue, which she's been. So her criticism of the Tories is that they're not sort of strong on that. I mean, and we know that the Labour Party are far weaker. Gareth, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate that. Gareth's in Derbyshire. Come back to Benedict Spence in the studio. I mean, this is the thing. Look, people, it's quality of MPs. I've certainly, we know, like the SNP. Labour and the SNP, they both had last elections. They both had a lot of people elected they didn't expect to get elected. Yeah. Actually, probably the Tories did as well. Yes. But there's an awful lot of, the sort of the blue hair, sort of pink hair brigade of sort of young people who perhaps, I'm going to say, perhaps have less to offer. Yeah, it depends how well you've done within the party itself rather than necessarily your suitability to be an MP. And there are reasons why that is, because parties want people that they feel that they can have a bit more control over. They want their people that they know, which has its benefits and it has its negatives ultimately. And that's sort of the balance that you've got to strike. I don't think any party has done particularly well, and I do think actually they're all going in a direction where it's a lot more centralised and it's far more about people who are career politicians rather than just ordinary people who have got a background in anything. Yeah, one of the biggest reasons why I'm against PR, proportional representation, or any reform where you don't end up with people who are elected in a constituency, chosen by constituencies. You lose that link, and you lose the ability where, a party headquarters can stand by an MP who's considered to have done something wrong, but the local party members and the local voters can go, no, I don't darn well think so. And I think that is really, really important. Let's also talk about major world events. We've got David Cameron, Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary. He's giving a speech right China. I can see it on the screen up above me, where he is basically calling on the EU leaders to basically take a stronger line when it comes to both Russia and China. He's saying that we should be spending more. This, of course, comes after the Russian defence attaché was expelled from the country over that hack by the Chinese. They believe, it was the Chinese. I lose track.
Chinese
Defection,
MOD,
yes, and the MOD. Again, we're fighting on many different fronts at the moment, are we not? It's all very well David Cameron sort of calling on everyone to spend 2.5% of GDP, but it didn't under his watch when he was Prime Minister.
No.
And a lot of this you could have seen coming.
True. He's not the only person who's talking about this.
No.
Manu in the Elysee is taking this quite seriously as well. The problem is we are a good 2 decades behind, actually, where we need to be in terms of not just defence spending, but what that would have actually procured us.
Takes a long time,
but not just in terms of defence, also in terms of decoupling from other. We saw this with Russia and its oil and Germany. The Eastern Europe and Central Europe was very reliant on that sort of thing. The rest of the world is still massively dependent, not reliant. It requires Chinese industry and it requires Chinese tech and Chinese firms to function. It'll take a long time to decouple. We can talk about decoupling. It is decades away, I'm afraid to say, because we were happy to take the cheap goods, to take the cheap labour when things were going well. We should have foreseen this. Plenty of people were saying, well, look, this is not a benevolent society, but we are where we are. It'll take a lot of investment. It'll take deregulation. It'll take a lot of things that the European Union does not want to do, actually. So that's a real uphill battle. But he is right, actually. If you want to be a serious player, an independent player, and not a vassal state caught between China or the United States, that's what's required.
But this is interesting, even though you've got the trade with China from Americans as well, in terms of they are not as reliant in the same way that Europe is on other nation states, because they've got the biggest oil producer now, oil and gas, and they're net exporters. And frankly, if we think things have been tough since Ukraine in Europe after these sanctions on Russia, imagine how bad it would be if we hadn't been able to buy liquefied natural gas and get our oil from America.
Yeah, but this is one of the great irritants when it comes to Brexit, is that Brexit was a fantastic opportunity to decouple from all the things that are holding Europe back. We do actually have the capacity to be energy sufficient, to do everything that we want to do, to be a massive technological driver. All of these things are within our grasp, and we have chosen, I say we, our overlords, our betters, the intelligent people of this country have decided, no, we don't need that. That's a luxury that we can do without. And I'm afraid it will mean that Europe and the United Kingdom, even though we've left the EU, we will become entirely pawns in a grander geopolitical game.
Absolutely, absolutely. It really is extraordinary what we've allowed to happen. And again, overseen. Again, it was that Cameron and Osborne happily selling off pretty much all our infrastructure to the Middle East or to China. It's insane. But there we are. As you say, the sensible people have been warning about this.